My name is Hannah Cole. I'm 26. And if there's one thing I've learned about my family, it's this: image comes first, truth comes last. And I'm always the one who pays the price for that order. I wasn't surprised when people laughed at me. I grew up with it. The raised eyebrows, the side glances, the looks that silently said, "Try harder to be like everyone else." I learned early how to stay quiet, how to shrink myself so I wouldn't disrupt the picture my family wanted to present. But nothing prepared me for the moment when humiliation stopped being something I could swallow. It happened at a family dinner. A man who barely knew me, my sister's new boyfriend, leaned back in his chair and asked if I was still unemployed, like it was the punchline to a joke he'd been saving. Everyone laughed. My dad even nodded, as if agreement made it harmless. For a moment, I almost let it slide. I almost absorbed it the way I always had. But humiliation has a breaking point. Sometimes it lands at the exact moment you're done pretending you don't feel it. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I just listened. And while he kept talking, confident and loud, he said something he shouldn't have. One sentence. One detail. Something that didn't fit. Something that made my chest tighten for half a second. I didn't call him out that night. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I let everyone enjoy their laughter. I watched quietly and waited, because some people reveal everything about themselves without realizing it. The dinner took place on a quiet Sunday evening. I drove back to my parents' house with the familiar tightness in my chest, the kind that appeared the moment I turned onto their street. Everything looked the same as it always had: trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, houses pretending nothing unpleasant ever happened behind closed doors. Inside, my mother stood at the kitchen island arranging plates like she was setting up a showroom. She greeted me with a smile that felt procedural. She didn't ask how I'd been. She asked why I was cutting it close, as if arriving a few minutes early was another personal failure. My father sat at the table sorting through mail. He nodded at me without looking up. That was all. No warmth. No welcome. A few minutes later, my sister arrived, followed by her boyfriend, Evan. The room shifted instantly. My parents straightened. Their expressions softened. Evan moved with the confidence of someone used to being admired, like the spotlight naturally followed him wherever he went. Conversation flowed around me, not to me. My mother laughed too loudly at his stories. My father encouraged him to talk more about his work. My sister watched proudly as the attention settled exactly where she wanted it. I kept my head down and ate quietly. The dynamic wasn't new, but that night it felt sharper, more deliberate, as if everyone had silently agreed that I shouldn't interfere with the image they were building. Eventually, the focus turned to me. It always did. Not out of curiosity, but tradition. They asked about work, about plans, about progress. Questions designed to measure, not understand. I answered simply. Nothing more. The silence that followed spoke louder than words. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened. My sister avoided my eyes. Evan noticed the tension and leaned into it. He began talking about his projects, his responsibilities, his connections. The table listened eagerly. And as he spoke, I heard it. A small inconsistency. A detail that didn't belong. I stayed silent. Because sometimes the smartest move is not to react, but to remember. Evan's confidence grew as the evening went on. He spoke like someone used to being listened to, layering his sentences with polished phrases and professional jargon. My parents absorbed every word, nodding along as if each statement confirmed they had chosen correctly. My sister watched him with open admiration, her posture subtly mirroring his, as though proximity alone elevated her. I watched differently. The more Evan talked, the more I noticed the rhythm of his speech. It wasn't natural. It was rehearsed. His stories flowed too smoothly, each point conveniently impressive, each explanation carefully vague. He referenced meetings, strategies, analytics, executive decisions, but never anchored them to anything concrete. Then it happened again. Another inconsistency. This time clearer. He mentioned a specific analytical review process, one that didn't exist in the department he claimed to work in. It was the kind of mistake only noticeable if you understood how those structures actually worked. No one else at the table reacted. They weren't listening for accuracy. They were listening for confidence. I felt something settle quietly inside me. Not anger. Awareness. Dessert was served, and the mood softened. Plates clinked, voices lowered. The dinner had reached the part where everyone relaxed, believing the night had gone exactly as planned. That was when Evan leaned forward again, clearly enjoying the room's attention. He made a comment about ambition, vague, harmless on the surface. My mother laughed immediately, encouragingly. My father followed with a soft chuckle. My sister smiled. Then Evan continued. He talked about people who drift. People who take too long to find direction. People who don't really have jobs yet, but like to talk as if they do. The laughter came louder this time. I felt the familiar sting of being the unspoken subject of the joke. I didn't react. Then he turned toward me fully and asked, casually, if I still had free time during the day. The word unemployed hovered in the air without ever being said. My mother sighed softly. My father swirled his drink, preparing for commentary that never came. They didn't need to say anything. The script was old. Someone poked. Everyone laughed. And if I responded, I would be the one accused of ruining the mood. So I stayed quiet. Evan took my silence as permission. He spoke about work ethic, stability, success. He sounded like a lecturer addressing a room that already agreed with him. My family listened like students taking notes. But I wasn't listening to be impressed anymore. I was listening for patterns. As he talked, the inconsistencies stacked up. Terms borrowed from different roles. Responsibilities that belonged to entirely separate divisions. Claims that contradicted statements he had made earlier in the evening. It wasn't one big lie. It was dozens of small ones stitched together convincingly. By the time dessert plates were cleared, I was certain of one thing. Evan wasn't just exaggerating. He was performing. I left the house that night feeling drained, but something else lingered beneath the exhaustion. Curiosity. The kind that doesn't fade once it takes hold. The next morning, while making coffee, his words replayed in my head, not emotionally, but analytically. I wasn't trying to prove him wrong. I was trying to understand why his story felt hollow. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and started small. Public information only. Company structure. Department descriptions. Leadership profiles. Everything Evan had mentioned was easy to verify. And at first glance, nothing looked wrong. But the details he used didn't exist anywhere. They belonged to other roles, other teams, other offices. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe cross-functional work. Maybe internal projects not listed publicly. People embellish all the time. Still, the gaps wouldn't close. The next day, I reached out to someone I'd worked with on a previous consulting contract. I didn't mention names or situations. I asked a general question about workflow in that company's analytics division. The answer came back quickly. Clear. Specific. And completely incompatible with Evan's version. That was the moment curiosity turned into resolve. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't reacting to humiliation. I was following instinct, the same instinct that had guided me through complex analysis work for years. When something doesn't add up, you don't ignore it. You look closer. And without realizing it at the time, that decision quietly set everything else in motion. I didn't confront anyone. Not my parents, not my sister, and certainly not Evan. There was no benefit in forcing a conversation that no one was prepared to hear. Instead, I let the questions guide me quietly, following the inconsistencies the same way I would approach any complex problem, methodically, without emotion. The next step came almost naturally. I reached out to Alex Nguyen, someone I had worked with briefly during a previous contract. Alex wasn't a close friend, but he was sharp, discreet, and thorough. The kind of person who noticed patterns others missed. When I asked if he had time to look into something, he didn't press for details. He only asked what I needed. I gave him Evan's name, the company he claimed to work for, and a few broad questions about employment records and affiliations. Nothing invasive. Nothing unethical. All of it fell within publicly accessible information. Alex said he'd check and get back to me. While I waited, I kept my distance. Life went on. My family acted as though the dinner never happened. No follow-up messages. No awkward apologies. The silence confirmed what I already knew. It was easier for them to move forward with the illusion intact. A day later, Alex messaged me. He hadn't found anything illegal. Not yet. But he had found something odd. Evan's name appeared in public filings linked to a small consulting entity registered under a virtual office address. No website. No listed staff. No visible project history. On paper, it existed. In reality, it didn't seem to do anything at all. That alone meant nothing. People register small companies all the time. Side projects. Future plans. Placeholder entities. Still, it stood in quiet contrast to the high-level responsibilities Evan claimed to hold at a major firm. I asked Alex to keep digging. In the meantime, I continued my own research. I searched for conference talks Evan mentioned giving. Publications he referenced. Panels he claimed to attend. In most industries, even small appearances leave some digital trace. There was nothing. Every claim led to a blank space. Like storefronts with clean windows and no inventory behind them. The pattern was becoming clearer. Evan's professional identity was built more on presentation than proof. The next update from Alex came the following evening. He had traced small financial transactions connected to the shell company. Irregular deposits over several months. The amounts varied, but the spacing was consistent. No invoices. No vendor payments. No signs of legitimate business activity. The deposits came from personal accounts under different names. I stared at the spreadsheet for a long moment, not feeling shock, just clarity. It resembled informal fundraising rather than income. Promises instead of products. Suddenly, Evan's dinner table comments about private investors and independent ventures made sense in a way I didn't like. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't assume criminal intent. But the structure was undeniable. Whatever he was doing, it relied heavily on trust, perception, and his ability to sound credible. My family would never listen to this without undeniable proof. My mother would dismiss it as jealousy. My father would tell me to stay out of it. My sister would defend Evan, because defending him meant protecting the image she had built her future around. So I said nothing. I organized everything Alex sent. Every filing. Every transaction. Every discrepancy. I replayed the dinner in my mind, each moment now illuminated by what I knew. Evan's confidence. His ease. His certainty that no one would question him. A few days later, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. The wedding invitation. My sister's name printed beside Evan's in elegant lettering. A vineyard venue. A celebration of new beginnings. I held the card longer than necessary, not out of sentiment, but understanding. If the truth was going to surface, it would be there. I submitted my RSVP that night. Attending. I didn't tell anyone why. The days that followed were quiet. No one reached out. No one asked questions. My presence was expected, not desired. I used the time to prepare, not emotionally, but practically. When Alex sent one final message saying he had found something more serious, I knew the pieces were nearly in place. And as I opened the file he attached, I understood that what came next would change everything, whether my family was ready for it or not. The file Alex sent was different from the others. It wasn't just numbers or registrations. It showed a pattern. When the transactions were arranged chronologically, they told a story. The deposits into Evan's shell company weren't random. They increased gradually, then spiked, then leveled off. It looked like staged rounds of personal fundraising rather than revenue from real work. More troubling was what followed. 2 of the incoming payments were linked to individuals who had previously filed small claims disputes over unreturned investments. The cases were old, small enough to avoid attention, and never publicly tied to Evan. But the connection existed. Not proof of a crime. Not enough for authorities. But enough to reveal risk. I sat quietly after reading everything, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't about exposing someone out of spite. It wasn't about correcting my family's opinion of me. It was about understanding the damage someone like Evan could cause if no one questioned him. A few days later, my sister forwarded a group message about the wedding schedule. Dress code. Parking instructions. A thumbs-up emoji followed when I acknowledged it. That was the extent of our communication. The night before the wedding, Alex sent one final update. He had found forum posts discussing private investment opportunities. One profile stood out. The writing style, the phrasing, the vocabulary, it matched Evan's voice. The posts were polished, persuasive, and vague. Some users praised the opportunity. Others questioned the lack of transparency. One comment mentioned losing a significant amount of money. The post was nearly 2 years old. That was enough. Not enough to accuse publicly. Not enough to involve authorities. But enough to understand the scale of what Evan had been doing, and the danger my sister was walking into by tying her life to him. I didn't create a dramatic plan. I didn't rehearse speeches or imagine confrontations. I simply gathered everything. Every document. Every pattern. Every verified inconsistency. I organized it into a single folder. Facts didn't need emotion. They needed timing. The wedding morning arrived with a strange stillness. I drove to the vineyard under a gray sky that didn't quite match the festive decorations lining the road. Guests arrived in clusters, laughing, adjusting outfits, taking photos. I walked in alone. The ceremony unfolded perfectly. My sister looked radiant. Evan stood waiting, confident, composed. Vows were exchanged. Rings placed. Applause filled the space. Everything looked flawless. The reception followed. Glasses clinked. Music played. My parents moved through the room glowing with pride, greeting guests like hosts of a well-produced event. My sister and Evan received congratulations from every direction. I waited. When speeches ended and people drifted toward the buffet, I moved. I approached them calmly. My sister noticed me first, her face softening in relief. Evan turned, smiling automatically, until he saw what I held. I opened the folder. I didn't speak at first. I let the documents do what they were meant to do. His eyes scanned the pages. Confusion flickered, then panic. My sister leaned in, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. I said only one sentence. You should know who you married. The silence around us grew heavy. Evan tried to speak, but his confidence fractured. Excuses tumbled out, incoherent, defensive. Each word revealed more than he intended. My parents rushed over. Anger flashed across my mother's face. My father accused me of ruining the day. They didn't ask if the information was true. They didn't need to. Evan's unraveling answered everything. I didn't stay to argue. I didn't wait for understanding. I turned and walked away as murmurs spread behind me. For the first time in years, leaving felt easy. No one followed me as I walked past the tables and toward the exit. Not my parents. Not my sister. Not even Evan, who was too busy scrambling to protect the image he had spent so long constructing. The noise of the reception dulled behind me with every step, until it was nothing more than a distant echo. Outside, the air felt lighter. I reached my car and sat for a moment without starting the engine. The folder rested on the passenger seat, now empty of purpose. Everything it needed to do had already been done. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. For years, I had been cast in a role I never agreed to play. The quiet one. The underachiever. The one whose discomfort was acceptable as long as the family image remained intact. That role had required me to shrink, to stay silent, to absorb moments that chipped away at my sense of worth. But clarity has a way of rearranging priorities. As I drove away from the vineyard, I understood something I had resisted for a long time. Family doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it means expectation. Sometimes it means performance. And sometimes, the price of staying is higher than the cost of leaving. I didn't know what would happen after that day. I didn't know if my sister would eventually see the truth or if she would choose denial. I didn't know whether my parents would ever question the choices they had made. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to know. Cutting ties wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was a decision rooted in self-respect. Walking away didn't erase the past, but it stopped the pattern from continuing. In the weeks that followed, there were no apologies. No late-night calls. No attempts at reconciliation. The silence remained, and this time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. I returned to my work, to the life I had been quietly building without their approval. I surrounded myself with people who didn't require me to prove my worth through titles or income. People who listened. People who didn't laugh at my expense to feel taller themselves. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about that dinner, the first moment Evan laughed, the moment my family joined him, the moment something inside me shifted. I realized that night hadn't broken me. It had woken me up. Speaking up isn't always about raising your voice. Sometimes it's about choosing the right moment. And walking away isn't failure. It's recognition. Recognition that you deserve more than conditional acceptance. More than applause that depends on appearances. More than love that disappears the moment you stop fitting the image. If you've stayed with my story this long, thank you for giving it your time. Stories like this don't travel because they're dramatic. They travel because they're familiar. And before you go, I'll leave you with one question, because it's the one I had to answer myself. What do you think is harder? Speaking up? Or finally walking away?